The accursed prince is here. To much shock and awe, but not that I would expect anything different to have come from the spawn point located in the hell betwixt these legs. I think we've done it. We may have finally found a worse mother than Big Mom. But this chapter starts out unbelievably adorably with a glimpse of Harold, Dory, and Brocky together as children, the latter of the two looking an awful lot like minions, and the three of them together remind me a lot of Ace, Sabo, and Luffy as kids. And something that I find rather mildly interesting is that Dory and Brocky have their preferred weapons, the sword and the axe, but child Harold seems to favor the hammer, which changes at some stage in his life to the trademark sword. But just like his son Loki, Harold was at one point a hammer user. But if we look at the bottom right hand side of this panel, we see the true nightmare of Elbaf being someone's disapproving mother. And Elbaf's theme of the power of mothers and wives will only continue with Eda later on in this video. But for now, Harold was naturally bigger and stronger than everyone else, which led him to becoming a bit bored and complacent. Mr. Harold had no challenge during his entire childhood because his mother had the decency to not toss him into the underworld and force him to climb back up via Yggdrasil. But this is where Harold's general cockishness comes from, and it's a similar brand of arrogance to that possessed by the world nobles. They definitely don't have Harold's strength, but a world noble is still born into a form of unparalleled power, which is why they're always so arrogant and, more importantly, so bored, because none of them have ever had to face a challenge in their lives. Although the key difference between them would be that Harold didn't quite realize what the world had to offer, and that strength can come from sources other than raw power. And as soon as he discovers that in this chapter, he becomes much more respectful of the world around him. So at first I was quite taken aback by just how quickly Harold's personality shifts in this chapter, and I think that this is another case of giant genetics really messing with my perception, because there was something about seeing a grown man instantly shifting his persona that felt odd. But Harold isn't a grown man. He is 45 human years old, but that is a mere 15 years in terms of giants. So Harold being slapped by Eda and his subsequent reaction is like a spoiled teenager being taught an extremely important lesson, and at that age it really does take just one sharp course correction to change the entirety of someone's life before adulthood settles in and views and personalities become a bit more set in stone, which is why we want to form some good habits before the bad ones take root, which can also be done with the sponsor of today's video, Fume. Fume is one of these things that is beyond satisfying to fidget with, and that is only a secondary function. Fume is a no smoke, no vapor, no nicotine, no battery, no significant damage to your wallet, and a non-toxic, brilliant burst of natural flavored air for your oral pleasures, very much akin to herbal teas, that are also specifically designed to break your bad habits. And unlike the One Piece power system, this is not all about raw willpower, as Fume gives you a strong ally in the battle against bad habits by giving you something else to reach out for instead. And very excitingly, Fume have launched a brand new summer flavor, being this here delicious mango, to give you a bold tropical experience like taking a relaxing vacation to an island full of women obsessed with mushrooms. You know the kind I mean. Don't pretend you don't. But it is a very specific flavor. You must try it. And over 500,000 people have already made the switch to Fume as part of their habit-changing journey. So if you're ready to try it for yourself, then now is the time. And for a limited time, if you order the Journey Pack using my promo code GRANDLINEREVIEW, you will get a free Fume topper, a very awesome accessory to level up your experience. Just head to tryfume.com/GRANDLINEREVIEW or scan the QR code on screen to get yours today. And thank you so much to Fume, because it's their sponsorship that allows us to bring you the best fictional pirate content possible as often as possible. Definitely give it a go. For now, it's back to you, me. And with that, we should get into Eda, which is exactly what King Harold would say about 3 years later, leading to a Haroldin. But Eda is a very unique character, because we have met so very few giants that are not from Elbaf, and those giants tend to be excessively and almost apologetically kind, almost as if to make up for the perception created by Elbafians. In this chapter, Eda mentions that the views of King Harold is why every giant in the world gets labeled as a savage, because they can't help but associate all giants with the loudest and most violent of voices, being Elbaf. And in fact, when we first see Eda at her circus job, she is introduced as an Elbafian giant, and I have to say, it was quite cute to see Eda doing her impression of a scary Elbaf giant to match, even sticking on a pair of ornamental ancient giant horns for extra scary. But I like that it makes more economic sense to sell Eda as the scariest possible form of giant, and so she's very actively using the impression of Elbaf to do some good here. But what I I really appreciate is that neither Harold nor Eda's initial thoughts are 100% correct. Harold has his juvenile preconceptions about humanity get absolutely shattered, and Eda has her perception about Elbaf get, well, not shattered, but like slowly eroded. And it is that chemical reaction that I imagine will act as the inception of the unity of all giant civilizations around the world. Because even after meeting Eda for less than a chapter, it's already pretty easy to see where Harold gets his dream of becoming king of the giants and bringing everyone together from, because that was what the combination of Harold and Eda showed was possible. Eda, right now, fits quite well into that vision of perfection often embodied by many flashback characters. I like her a lot, and that worries me a fair bit, because this is usually the part of the flashback where I need to remind myself of incoming tragedy. But just on that, we're not actually sure what happened to Eda at the moment. We don't even know if she's dead. We know that Loki's mother is dead, and frankly, that is excellent. We'll get to her in a bit. But unlike most biological mothers in One Piece, Eda may very well still be alive. Although I do doubt that a fair bit, because even before we get to the death of Harold, there seems to be a whole string of tragedy leading up to that first. And looking at all of the characters available to produce that tragedy, we have a very short list. Everyone else is alive in the modern day, again with the exception of Estrid. But look, mate, I have a hard time believing that Harold was too bothered by her loss, to be completely honest. Back to Eda, she mentions that she was born on the island of Summer One Eye, which is in South Blue. And firstly, what's notable about this is that the island's name is written in katakana, which is a bit odd for such clear Japanese words. Summer One Eye would literally mean not cold or no coldness. But South Blue is also the same area of the planet where Jaguar D Sol was born. We don't know his exact island yet, but he's also from South Blue, and at this stage my bet would be that he's from the same island as Eda. And in the past, I have also offered speculation that Sol could be related to Haruden's mother, because Haruden was the man who Sol called in to assist removing all of the books from Ohara. And given that Eda is from this South Blue giant civilization, that also means that there is a non-0% chance that Eda is a carrier of the Will of D, because Sol said that everyone in his family had that sweet D. And then the discussion turns to the rather fascinating topic of the blood-soaked serpent, which is a concept that has come up in One Piece before a long time ago, which was right at the end of Little Garden. Dory stated that the only thing capable of withstanding their attacks was a, quote, snake soaked in blood. And in chapter 1153, we confirm that this is how Elbafians refer to the Red Line, which is now very evocative of the Oraborus, the snake eating its own tail and forming a ring. And the current thinking in regards to this is that the Red Line could be the very literal snake that we see in the Elbaf mural, and that perhaps say the first world ended with the creation of the Red Line via this big ol' snake. The Oraborus symbol itself is meant to represent the cycle of destruction and rebirth, you know, our very classic sun godly themes, which ends up being extremely relevant elsewhere in this chapter actually. Eda tells Harold that the destruction of anything in this world is a waste, and this dialogue is juxtaposed directly against a panel of Harold and one of his men performing the Nika dance, which is absolutely not a coincidence given Nika's association with the concept of destruction. And it's from this moment on that Harold, whether he's purposely trying to be Nika or not, adopts the other reading of Nika, and he makes it his mission to open up the world, to bring down borders and deliver the freedoms. So interestingly enough, what Harold wants without realizing it is to connect the old world the way it was before the Great Flood. He wants to learn, share, and align with neighboring nations to bring them together in a way that they once literally were, sharing the same continent. But Harold's Nika dance also does take my mind back to Jarl's dialogue in chapter 1136, where he said, even Loki and the late Harold, in a sense, are the result of attempting to be Nika, perhaps. And you know, watching Eda and Harold reminds me a lot of the Odin montage with Toki. Odin meets Toki, they bond over something of a communal heritage. We see a series of adventures and then bam, baby. Or at least it feels like bam, reading it this way. In reality, this period of time did take 24 years for Eda and Harold, so about 8 human years, meaning that Harold was a lot more restrained than Odin was, who wasted absolutely no time getting to work. And as a side note, I'm also a little bit curious as to how long a giant pregnancy lasts for, because if the maths keeps panning out at the 1 to 1:3 ratio here, then you would think that a mother could be pregnant for potentially 27 months. And maybe the giants don't feel the perception of time in the same way that humans do, but my god, does 27 months sound like an awfully long time to be pregnant. However, one of the most interesting parts of this chapter for me was seeing the panel of these four, I'm not quite sure what to call them, elders, administrators, or otherwise cultural dictators, stating that they will not recognize Harold's marriage to Eda due to the need for pure bloods within the royal family. So this has been on my mind since pretty much the beginning of Elbaf. The idea that there is this faction of giants out there who won't accept Harold due to his blood. And the question I've been asking is, well, where are they? We still have yet to meet a single giant in the modern day who has any prejudice against Harold whatsoever. So I want to know where on Elbaf these guys are and who exactly they are, especially since they seem to have the power to tell the king who he can and cannot marry. But look, those mystery dudes aside, I have to say that both Harold and Eda take this degree rather well, especially Eda. She doesn't seem upset at all. She's just happy that Harold gets to stay close to Harold. Which of course brings us to Estrid. Estrid, who definitely continues our theme of pairs on Elbaf. We have co-captains, we have lots of co-captains, brothers, and now we've met a pair of mothers. And I have to say that Oda did a pretty brilliant job in speedrunning Estrid's unlikability. All it took him this time were 3 panels. The first is a close-up of her face, nothing wrong there. And then we cut to a full body, things are still going well. But then what she does, right, Estrid opens her mouth, she calls Harold a bastard, and it all falls apart. And from there, Estrid also completely changes the environment of the castle with whatever her highly irritating version of feng shui is, just for Oda to really hammer home what a bad match she is for Harold, to require him to completely upend the way he lives in order to accommodate her. Because here's the thing with Harold and Eda, right? They were not a perfect match by any means. They have a lot of very key differences, but what they did is they compromised and they listened to one another. But with Estrid, there is no compromise. Things can only be done her way. And mate, that sounds like a nightmare of a marriage. But there is another interesting contrast here, and with all due respect to Eda, Estrid is definitely designed to be the more conventionally attractive One Piece woman. And in this case, I think it's a pretty brilliant way for Oda to use this trope that he's developed and or fallen into. And so that very stereotypical beauty plays very nicely with the idea that within Elbaf, there is an acceptable kind of woman for Harold to marry. Someone with, all of the appropriate genetics. In the case of the story, that's having the blood of Elbaf. But that's also reflected quite well in the art style by giving Eda a much less conventional design with a lot of aesthetic elements that Oda would not normally deem appropriate for one of his leading ladies. And of course, that's paired with the irony that we're already aware of, where Harold, the man with the much less acceptable blood, looks and acts more like a warrior of Elbaf, whereas Loki, the man with the pure blood, ends up looking like some sort of demonic entity. And getting into that now, the sequence of baby Loki being thrown into the underworld is so unbelievably heartbreaking. You've got these teeny tiny arms reaching up for their mother, a close-up of a teary single eye, and then we cut straight to the baby already halfway through a fall intended to kill it. And so, as it turns out, Loki actually shares a bizarre similarity with Charlotte Linlin, as both were dumped by their parents into the underworld of Elbaf. And not only that, but it happened in the exact same year, as 10 months after Charlotte Linlin was abandoned was the announcement of the birth of Prince Loki. So we know that as of the last few pages of this chapter, Big Mom is on Elbaf, as is Mother Carmel and the orphans. Although Loki's birth still has yet to be announced, right now we're trying to cover up his very unsuccessful murder, so almost nobody knows that he exists. But I bring up the Big Mom connection because I'm fairly certain that we're going to see Loki's proposal to Lola, even if only briefly in this flashback. And after having seen Loki being born with two eyes of Sauron, it could be possible that Lola accidentally saw Loki's eyes and wasn't bothered by them, which is why he decided to pursue her. Kind of like how Sanji wasn't bothered by Pudding's third eye and even thought it was beautiful. And look, as terrible as I feel for baby Loki, Oda has also gone out of his way to create some almost horror-esque imagery with him. The panel of Loki climbing up Yggdrasil like Luffy climbed the Drum Rockies goes so unbelievably hard. But look, if this happened in real life, it would feel like being stalked by a demon. Especially when we get to this panel of the underworld, and we see that baby Loki has decapitated a whole-ass giant bear prior to his ascent to the Sun World. It's pretty scary. scary stuff. And as part of this, we also address the prophecy that we'd heard previously, the one that stated that one of King Harold's sons was destined to kill him. And if I'm not mistaken, it turns out that prophecy was completely made up by Estrid in an attempt to, I guess, slander Loki. At least that's the impression I get. So again, when it comes to Loki, all we really have are the lies and mistruths of others to go off, which seems to have resulted in the impression that Loki is genuinely cursed. Although one positive I will say for all of this curse business is that being cursed tends to be very straw hat coded. Our crew is packed full of people whose birth and or right to exist has been directly questioned. For example, Chopper with his blue nose in the reindeer pack, Sanji with his lack of genetic modifications, Robin for being O'Haran, Frankie being abandoned by his parents, and in general, our crew do quite well with curses. And in fact, this may even explain why Luffy was so attracted to Loki right from the beginning. Because if you recall the beginning of Wano, Luffy's attention was taken by the Nidai Kitetsu. And even after being warned about its curse, he wasn't at all bothered. Because our crew already comes equipped with every devil, demon, and monster it is you can imagine. So look, if Loki is legitimately cursed, then welcome home, brother. Come cause a storm with the rest of the devils and demons of our crew. And this may also be why Loki does seem to have a soft spot for everyone and everything in the underworld. He, more so than anyone else, knows what it's like to be dumped down there. So it's no wonder that he's made friends with all the animals and even all those cloaked humans that we've still not seen again. It's almost as if Loki took it upon himself to become a protective big brother figure to all of them, to give them something that he never really had. And also, in retrospect, it's quite an incredibly cruel punishment to be imprisoned in the same location where his mother tried to kill him. Because every day Loki wakes up in that same spot to remind him of how much his mother wished he'd never existed. But with Estrid, I think she'll be dead by the next chapter. According to what we already know about Loki's history, his mother died about a year after he was born, and the last panel of Loki shows him having grown quite a lot. So I imagine the next chapter might open with word of her death and we'll never see her again. So I guess I should take the opportunity now to give Estrid a big round of applause for causing so much damage in such a short amount of time. Her existence lasted about 7 pages, and unfortunately it will not be forgotten. And it is quite sad really, because if Eda had been around instead of or even in addition to Estrid, then Loki could have been looking at a completely different life. In fact, in this chapter, Eda seems to be the only one who appreciates the fact that Loki exists, and should Eda still be alive, that does make me wonder if the mystery moss speaking to Loki on the Den Mushi could indeed be her. But you let me know what your thoughts are on everything in the comments below. And thank you so much again to Fume for sponsoring this video, and definitely check them out through the link in the description.